No, I think I want.
Razor and those guys jumped up. Their test was head and half. It was Tuesday and Wednesday this week. And then this morning I was looking over the agenda and I saw your name on it. You know, I ought to call Jamie and find out.
No, I'm on. But I dealt with.
Where's my school bell?
Yeah,
I 30 years. I don't know. It's going. There's no question.
41
I kidded him. I think he overslept.
I don't know.
He didn't know how to get here. But I'm going to start, and then he's still in.
See how much alike we look? Yeah, Rod, you do.
Well, I want to welcome all of you to Broadland. I'm so happy to see everybody. And you know, there are 3 stages in life. There's youth, there's middle age, and gee, you're looking great. So this means a lot to me, and I think we have all 3 categories here. So and we all have a place in this project. And how it began is Jeff and I were reminiscing about how skiing began, and he couldn't believe some of the stories that I told him and how we started, and particularly I was interested in Farmington in '38, and we weren't poor, but we didn't have any money. And so we lugged the gasoline in on our backs, and the men took their clippers in, and I was involved in Saddleback, and they were scrounging around. I was involved in Sugarloaf, and I know the ski patrol had limited funds. Where's Stubb?
He's working on pictures.
There's Beedy. My daughter coming in to help, and we're all old school teachers. And so that's the way it started, and I just want to tell you how my family particularly were involved in skiing and how it influenced our life. And the old pine tree there at Titcomb is a symbol. That's Stubb. Ski patrol! So I was going to I'll turn this over. Jeff, where are you? Did you want to speak now?
I'll say something.
But whatever category you're in, youth, middle age, or gee, you're looking great, you've all had part of it, and I thank you. And this is my son, Jeff. No, I'm all right.
Thanks,
I'm all right, because I'll keep moving.
Excuse
me.
Somebody asked why would I want to do this? You know, put the time into getting this together, and initially started with some material my mother sent down to me about a year ago, and I was looking through it, and there was a letter in there from Rita Stoddig talking about her dad's chairlift that he had built in 1947, and it was a handwritten letter, and I held it there, and I was sitting in my room, and I was also doing some history work for my dissertation, and I said to myself, you know, if somebody doesn't do something with this, you know, piece of information, there's a chance that, you know, it will be lost, and a piece of Maine will be lost. And I thought more about that, and I thought the fact that even though I wasn't one of the early skiers like all of you, and I don't claim to be, I knew my parents were, and I felt that I had an opportunity, you know, to collect some of this stuff. I had some energy, and I had to sort of replace the dissertation, which got done in March. I figured I had to have something else to do. So I thought it'd be kind of a fun thing to do, and I thought also that it was an important activity in Maine's history. So I got thinking about it, and I thought that it'd be kind of fun to grab this opportunity to get you guys together and to collect some information. I also found that after doing a little bit of research myself for my work at Harvard, I felt that it was a lot of fun to learn some facts. And as I started to dig into this, and I don't even know if some of these things aren't, I guess, even facts, because in one document I'll read someone will say this was the first tow in Maine, ski tow in Maine, and they'll say 1937, and someone else will say 1934, and someone else will claim this. So I don't know. All it is information, and hopefully today you'll help me sort out some of these things. But some of the interesting facts I found was I found over the last couple of months that Eastport, Maine had skiing in 1949 to 51 for 2 years with a rope tow up there. It was called Pembroke Hill. Some of you folks may know about that. I've got some shots of that. According to the Maine Ski Council, in 1950, Jockey Cap in Freiburg was the first rope tow in Maine. I don't know if that's actually true or not, but the Maine Ski Council says so. And I'd like to read something from Walter, a letter from Rita Stodig about her dad that I found interesting. And this is really the letter that got me going in putting this together. This is a letter written to my mother. My mother was collecting information in the 60s on the skiing history in Maine. It said, my dad's chairlift was at Soldier Pond. It was probably owned and built. It was privately owned and built by Walter Stodig, and it was an aerial tramway of 1,850 feet. Later, someone says it's 2,400 feet in length, which carried skiers up the steep incline to a heated cabin. It was designed and built by Mr. Stodig and could carry 20 skiers per time in individual chairs riding on an endless steel cable pulled by his small Jeep. It was built on Michoud Hill in Soldiers Pond 1947-48 and operated for 2 years or 2 winters. It was built mostly as an experiment, and after 2 winters it was torn down and parts of it was transported to Thorn Mountain in Jackson, New Hampshire, where he engineered a huge development there. And later, when they got some information from, I believe, from Charlie Bradford, it said that it had 22 chairs and it was 2,400 feet long, but in any case, I thought that was sort of an interesting piece of information. So that's really what, got me started, was that I was saying, geez, this would be kind of sad if some of these things were left and no one really documented them, or it wasn't put down someplace. But as I got going in it, I found that it wasn't that was really keeping me going. It was more the people. Now I'm doing it just because it's a lot of fun, and I think that the people that are involved in it are the things that that's the motivation that I get from it. When I run into Dana Wallace and see his face light up at Sugarloaf, or if when I get my phone bill, I see that maybe we talk a little bit too long about skiing in Farmington in early times, or getting a call from Win Roberts and seeing his excitement, and getting some letters from the people who have put a lot of time into this for me, and made it was fun for them. It certainly made it fun for me. And I also see that the history's sort of fallen down through the ages. Amanda has gotten really excited about this project, and she said to me today, she said, "Dad, who's the most famous person coming today?" And I figured that it probably wouldn't make political sense for me to say that, who I thought it was, so I don't really know. But she said, "I think you ought to get his autograph, whoever it is." So we have you signing in, and we got everybody's autograph. It's also Amanda who made the signs for you and the cookies, so I'd like to thank her, and she's taken a big interest in the history of it, and I just started to think, geez, what, when she's 20, 25, what's going to be available for her to look back and find out what skiing was like in the earlier days. I'd like to just end on something that really Dana brought up, and that was the whole thing about cooperation and the fact that it was that skiing in Maine was a volunteer thing, and most of these documents that I have found and information that I've put together, everybody talks about pitching in, and there wasn't any money involved, and people were putting in their time, and people like Gould Roberts, who takes me in and spends a whole afternoon out of his time and to take me up into the libraries and of the University of Maine in Farmington, and people like yourself who come today to pitch into this, and I think that's really the theme of it, is the cooperation. But this is a letter from Charlie Bradford that my mother had gotten in the mid-'60s, and it talks about the cooperation. I think it's a good way to start this off. And he says, in retrospect, skiing in the early days of Maine State Park program is interesting and portrays quite a contrast to the area operations around the state today. As I look back, it seems to me that one word that is absolutely essential to the state park is cooperation. Without it, the various winter sports programs in the state parks would have never gotten off the ground. First was a rustic state park in Presque Isle. The land was donated by the Merchants Association. A half-mile ski trail was built from the summit of Quaggy Joe Mountain at Echo Lake. The toe was unique for potato land being made out of donations from a potato sled pulled by a wire cable the state bought. The power line and the electric motor were gifts, as was the first aid equipment. The first woman hut was built of poplar logs cut from the ski trail. Boy, were they heavy and slippery. The doors, the windows, the stove were donated, as were the waterproof fertilizing bags for the roof. Someone gave Bates College a few dollars for the abandoned Mount David toboggan chute, and the Coles Express delivered it for free to the state park. And I think it's this type of cooperation that, you know, would make skiing in Maine what it is. And I'd like to turn it over to Dana Wallace, who's, I think, epitomizes that type of motivation and care for people. Thank you.
I really don't know where to pick this up, but I'd like to follow along this theme that Jeff has just launched into, particularly with Charlie Bradford, who is one of the greatest friends of skiing. To my knowledge, he never skied. At least when we know him, he had some problems and so forth. But I met Charlie Bradford up on Quaggy Joe Mountain. He was the state park, he was superintendent of all the state parks in the state of Maine, which was Quaggy Joe State Park, and he was shingling the one roof on the one building owned by the state of Maine, and I think it had been a three-holer before it became a little tool shed for the park. And that was my introduction to Charlie Bradford. Also the S Trail on Quaggy Joe, and I happened to be up there because I had been precipitated out of college in 1939, went up to Presque Isle ostensibly as the track coach and cross-country coach and teaching assignment and so forth. And the principal said, well, now, Dana, you can help with our basketball program, can't you? And I looked Frank straight in the eye. I said, Frank, I've never seen a basketball game in my life, and I'm not going to start now. What else can I do in the wintertime? He said, oh, we could get a ski team going and get a winter sports program going, because they have them up in Caribou and they have one in Fort Fairfield, and we could take the boys to the carnival. I says, fine. Where do I do next? Well, the next thing, of course, was to get a pair of skis. And so we went to a fellow by the name of Anderson up in New Sweden, and he made me a pair of 6-foot skis, and steel edges were just coming in vogue then, and he said for $2 extra, it was costing $6 for the skis, he says, I'll put these new steel edges on, and we got a new binding that's being used over in Europe, and they're beginning to use it here, called a bear trap binding. I said, fine, put it on. That cost an extra $1. The poles were bamboo, and they cost $2 more. And I said, what do we do for boots? He says, Bass makes the best boot in the world. So I went down to a local store and got a pair of Bass boots, which cost $5, and I was the best equipped skier in the state of Maine. So this way some of us, so I feel, obviously, I'm really a Johnny-come-lately. I was not precipitated in as far as organizational skiing, but the skis that I have right here, my dad made for me in 1925. My sister tells me she has a photograph of me having a pair of skis when I was 3 years old. But I want you to see something. There's camber in them skis. Look at that. Camber in the skis. And so, anyhow, getting back why we do such things, why would a Maine farmer want to have his son on any dangerous thing such as this? But I have heard, I heard later on, put it this way, that in the late 1800s and in the early 1900s there was quite a number of skis even manufactured here in the state of Maine. And I skied with Stan Holt, a lawyer in Stan Holt?
Gardner.
In Gardner. And he told me that where the the Dick Fabrication building is there, that they had made skis there in the late 1800s. So that I am not sure, but apparently there was a ski place there at one time. And what he invited me to do at one point was to come down the the tote road at Sugarloaf with a pair of skis that I think they came from those factories. They were about this long, and I skied down with him. So skiing has been around for a long time, and a lot of people, most of us started, a lot of people of course were involved, most of us started going absolutely downhill. Bob Dow tells a story of being over in Europe and after the war over there, of being rotated into a recreation area. Then went up to Garmisch, or one of the areas, and one of the organized areas in Austria, and a whole group of soldiers on leave, and there was a lot of Maine boys. Said the natives were just terrified of these Maine boys getting on their skis, no idea how to turn them, and just going straight down. So there's, it's been going on a long time, and of course we're also delighted, and I know every one of you has had probably a tremendous amount of fun thinking about this meeting today, and thinking of the fact that we're going to tap into the energy and the vitality that Jeff has shown, and thank goodness he finished up that doctorate and now has the time and is willing to spend it to pull all of these things together. Already the things that have been collected there are just tremendous. And given an opportunity, why, of course, any one of you will go on, and I think the way Jeff has talked about doing it, when Robin's showing up, is this afternoon is to give more detail of our individual reactions to a lot of the things, but there is so much activity that has really gone on in so many different ways. For instance, one of the people that would stand right here and could talk all day, as Win Robbins could, or any of the rest of you, was Ted Curtis at the University of Maine.
You mean competition?
And, yes, competition. Ted Curtis at the University of Maine, I talked with him on the phone, I guess for about 3/4 of an hour maybe, and I'm telling you, all of the things came up. For instance, Ted is very proud of, for 31 years coaching at the University of Maine, he had 24 State of Maine championship teams. It goes way back into the early 20s and all that sort of thing. Obviously, I have talked too long, taken up too much time. I defer to my elders and betters, and we'll sit down for a moment. Thank you.
Very good extemporaneous. Practicing all week.
Well, good practicing all week. I like that podium.
You're on.
I'm on?
You're on it.
You're the elder that's on.
I apologize for being late, but I do want to make a impressive...
For all fellas to get up this morning, isn't it?
I don't know what I'm doing up here, because I've been around this business since 1920. Well, let me see. I started skiing when I was 8. God almighty, how far back is that? 1916. I sort of grown up with this business. I don't know why. I had my first experience on rural skiing when Horace Schneebs of Dartmouth decided that if I could train my cross-country snowshoe runners to win their share of points, that we could throw the balance of the Lake Placid and the Dartmouth Carnival either between New Hampshire or Dartmouth. Consequently, Otto said, well, if you can teach a couple of my boys to run, maybe I'll teach you to ski. So I started learning to really do something besides downhill, take your skis off, go back up and ski down. And then we advanced very rapidly after that to the point that I'm a little ahead of myself. Before we discovered that if you put a jar rubber over your heel and over your toe, you could control your skis better. That was an advancement. Some smart engineer, I'm sure, developed the idea that if that was the an improvement if you had a Bellstein spring in which you put around your ankle and hook to a little hook in the back of your ski, you could do better. So that was another improvement. My first experience on a ski lift was at Dartmouth in 1930 when we were competing, University of Maine was competing in that was on the so-called famous Suicide 6 in Vermont. That was the start of uphill transportation for skiing in this country. It was not anywhere near the start of uphill skiing because they'd been skiing in Europe for 60,000 years, according to some of the skis that they dug up out of the swamps in Norway and Sweden. Just to note that during the First World War, the Austrians and the Italians, in order to get up and shoot at each other on the top of the mountains, built 1,600 lifts. This is the reason that the Europeans were so far ahead of us on wire rope transportation. Getting back to ski toes, after the advent of the lift at Suicide 6, there was a rush of building ski lifts, rope tows. Everybody had a tractor. Some motivation for uphill pole developed a rope tow. Here are a few that were built in Maine. Bridgeton Country Club, Bridgeton Pleasant Mountain, Hurricane, Falmouth, another one Hurricane, Blackstep, Ball Mountain, Dedham, Dixmont, Jockey Cap. It's the best first one that I can find, 1935, Titcomb Slope, Kingfield, VZ, Bar Harbor, Fort Kent, Fort Fairfield, Hebron, Lost Valley, Lewiston 2, Millinocket 1, Mars Hill, Gorham, Camden, Augusta, Pittsfield, Dexter, Sugarloaf, Rumford, Greenville, 2 in Rangeley.
That Sanford one out, boy.
Now how many did I miss?
Well, that's the only one I know, that one in Sanford.
Good. Yes, another one up in, another one up in,
Well, that was the only one I knew.
well, that to give you some idea how the proliferation of the rope tows. With the advent of the rope tow, they got into building a much better ski, as we well know. I see a few vintages here, like I got a pair up the car. These look like they might have been made up in Norway. Following the advent of the rope tow, the European chap by the name of Constam came over here and interested Roblin, wire rope people, to build T-bars, which is a big improvement over the old rope tow. I wish I had time to bring up some of the stuff that I had down south and I forgot to. But I had some of the old mittens that they used to use in these rope tows with the leather palms and so forth. But one of the first T-bars that went in was the Constam at Pleasant Mountain. Other T-bars that followed were Colby, Ball Mountain, Saddleback, Sugarloaf, Camden, another Ball Mountain, Dedham, Lost Valley, Mount Abram, Sunday River, Sky High, Mars Hill, Titcomb, and Squaw Mountain. All of these areas that you now have given up, mostly have given up the T-bars and gone to chairlifts. The first chairlift was on the state, if I remember rightly, was put in at Pleasant Mountain. That was again a Constam.
What year was that in? No.
No, I don't. I think it's 50, early 50s. You may not know, because you were all aware of the snow trains that came out of Boston early in the 30s when they had started their ski program at Mount Cranmore. The first year they took up about 1,000 people. Last year they took up over 33,000 people. Kitty Car Hill, of course, was the big thing at Cranmore, and then at Black Mountain, the shovel handle lift and rope tows. Get back to the area which is probably closest to our heart is Sugarloaf. Early on, Amos, as you know, fathered that hill, took people to ski there. In those days you climbed as far as you could climb, and if you got in 3 or 4 runs, that was a day skiing. He also got a great many people interested in going up to the valley in Mount Washington and skiing the head wall in the spring. After people learned that they could handle that type of skiing, he was in better position to sell Sugarloaf. I had the opportunity to go up with Amos in 1953, I'm sorry, and run the first profile of the first T-bar. There was no question about snow. I was using a 12-foot level rod to read. I had snowshoes on the bottom of my level and had a 3-foot piece of steel on the bottom of my level rod so that I could get to the solid ground. In 1954, there was a group of men got together at the old inn at Gardner and discussed the possibility of getting a corporation set up or a club set up to build a T-bar. I can't, my 80-year-old memory slips me, but Amos, of course, was there. I don't think any more will blow away. The rest are on clip.
You're not 80 years old.
Want to bet?
It's too cold. Doing great.
Just checking.
As a result of that meeting, there were 5 of us that went over to Pleasant Mountain, looked over that T-bar. Then we drove up into New Hampshire and looked at several T-bars. And as a result of that visit and several meetings following, they decided to buy a Constam T-bar. That was to replace the old 400 and 500 foot little rope tow that we had up there after we finally got a road up to the little cabin that is now long gone.
You know how to use these?
Yeah, I use them.
Let him.
I still have to do my own walking.
You what?
I still have to do my own walking.
You have to do his own way.
Well, they decided to buy a Constam lift. Well, I had already had experience putting up a Constam up in New Hampshire. So, being a foolish contractor, I bid to install it. And we had a few problems, but eventually we got the T-bar in. And we had a dedication. And for some reason or other, my wife and I were given the opportunity to be the first riders. Well, of course, if you remember the T-bars, you were told not to sit. My wife didn't follow instructions. The minute it hit, she sat. I went, Mark hit me. I put my ski up crosswise. I caught the bar and the stanchion, pulling stanchion. And I gracefully hauled up a hill about 50 feet before the astonished operator decided that it was time to shut the bloody thing off. That isn't the first time they made a goof, though. I mean, that's the last time. We were over in New Hampshire a long time ago, Bob Kenny, and the governor over there who ran the area at Loon was hiring us as consultants. Bob and I both were talking about lifts, and I think we were trying to get a pipe lighted. We stepped up to a double chair lift, and we both fell down, and the governor said, "Good God, I'm paying $200 a day for consultation, and damn them, they don't even know how to ride a lift." But anyway, we got the T-bar built, and as you know, we got a little clubhouse, and from there on, Sugarloaf has grown. It is probably one of the better and larger ski areas in New England, certainly the oldest well-known area. It has reached a point now that I no longer can justify my background to inspect or do the tests on these new sophisticated lifts that are coming in. They just put in one over at Sunday River, which is a detachable quad, and it takes an Einstein to know how to operate the electrical system, and it takes a mechanical engineer with at least a doctorate to be able to go through the machinery. As a result, I'm going to retire after having put in all too many years. One side point that I wanted to make, I spoke of the Boston ski trains that went up to North Conway. I don't know whether you are aware of it, but there was a Portland Ski Club, which I think probably is one of the earliest ski clubs in the state. I was working there on the harbor on the survey of the coastal geodetic in 1934 and 35, and the ski club developed at that time. There was a snow train left Portland and went up to Freiburg. Freiburg had a little lift called the Jockey Cap. That was one of the first experiences, and it is an experience which I'll never forget. As a result of that trip, it was the first time I ever got drunk. I have skied a long time. I still ski. One of the trips that I probably enjoyed the most, and some of you may know, I skied off the top of Mount Katahdin in 1935. The day before I climbed that area, got caught in a snowstorm, slid one of the slides about 1,200 feet, got my skis under me, looked down below me and there was 500 foot of ice. The Lord must have had a reason to keep me around to do something in ski business. In this folder I have the first papers of the corporate papers and the first financial statement and all the things of Sugarloaf. And I think that's about all I can tell you about skiing.
Thank
I
you.
won't be late next time.
Stub, can I ask you to go now? Because Wes is going to go need the video. I figured after you we could take a break, have some coffee, and move down into the garage for the next one. Thanks.
Certainly brings some memories when he talks about early skiing and some of the episodes. One thing that Wynn didn't mention, I can remember on that first T-bar, the safety switches at the top were two dry cell batteries hooked to a line, and if anyone went through the switch, or them friggin' batteries went anywhere they wanted to go, and sleep patrol had to go out and find them and put them back, and all the time the public had to wait. skiing has been my life, and being a patrol director at Sugarloaf has been all of my life, and I'd just like to go back a ways and tell you some of the things that's happened. And first of all, I guess it wouldn't be fitting not to mention how ski patrolling came about. There was a guy by the name of Charles Minute Dole, who was an insurance broker from New York, and he was skiing at Stowe. And this was before any organized patrolling at all. And he was skiing with a bunch of friends, and one of the friends' name was Edison. And he took a run and broke his ankle. And there was no facilities, no toboggans, no patrol to take him down. And he laid there quite a while. They went to help, or for help, and this Edison came to a farmhouse and asked the farmer if he could help him, and he said, well, told him what it was about, and said, well, if there was a damn fool skier up there, he could stay there. So he moved on to another house, and finally he came along, and some people came back, and they finally got a piece of tin, corrugated tin, and went back up on the hill and got him. And this is exactly how early ski patrolling started, and he was one of the instigators of it. Early skiing, what was it like? Well, it was much quieter. I can remember no toes clanging, very few people. The snow was much softer because you didn't pack as much, and I can remember skiing on Bigelow in the late 40s, before I graduated in high school, which is 1953. We used to leave the store. Amos was the general manager of Sugarloaf for the first one, and we used to leave the store at 9 o'clock. He had to work in the store. So we'd leave at 9 o'clock, and we'd go across Lexington Flat and up north New Portland, and the CCCs had a camp that we had moved across the brook, and they had cut the trail. I didn't help cut that trail, but they had already cut, and they were skiing there in the 40s, early 40s. And what we used to do is, we used to go in at night. We'd have a pack, and we had a camp, of course, in there. We'd step out if it snowed, and it generally had snowed during the week. So in order to break trail on this logging road, there'd be somebody ahead breaking trail, and then they'd keep swapping off, and the guys all in back. And when I say guys or people, there'd probably be 5 of us at the most. And it was always done on weekends. So that's the way we packed the trail. And then on the trail going up to the mountain from the camp to the summit of Bigelow, which was all cut, there again, mostly by hand saws and snippers. This was before chainsaw days. And so then we would step out on the corners, in other words, turn around and step all the corners around so that we'd have a better ski surface and have it tightly packed when they come down. As I mentioned, I graduated in '53, and Sugarloaf Corporation was formed in 1955. And of course I'd been skiing in some races and whatnot with Amos, and Amos always liked kids and took us to different meets. And Kingfield High School, being as small as it was, couldn't produce a ski team, so it was like the Thompson boys and myself, and we was always in competition with the Folgers and the Webbers, who came from Farmington. So that was kind of interesting. We always was eager to do one another. And of course we always, at the end of the season, eventually after Sugarloaf developed, we got into an episode with the ski races in Sugarloaf Short. And my ambition as a skier was to always be in the top 10 in that race. And it was funny because my skiing days was, I would do a lot of skiing, but then I hit a point in the racing career that I would go so fast, and then I knew something would happen, or thought it would happen, and I would start slowing down in the gates. And so I never was really pushing myself to the real high limit. And but in one of the last races, it was something like 70 some odd contestants racing down Little Winders Way, and it was all walking in. And by that time I come in 11th, so I felt pretty lucky. Early first aid courses were hard to come by, and as the mountain developed and seeing the potential of maybe some interest in working in some benefit way. I guess is how I got into the ski patrol business. So there was another board of directors and a friend of mine that was Dick Bell, who's no longer with us, but Jimmy Jones here, the gentleman on the right, was had courses in Pleasant and down in Portland. So we, along with Dick, I said, well, geez, I got to have some first aid courses if I'm going to do this job and for the corporation. So I had to find the only courses I had previous to that was some training in first aid as far as the Boy Scouts are concerned. So Dick said, well, that's no problem. We can drive down to Portland. Well, Portland was like from here across the ocean to me at that time. So every year we'd go down and Jimmy would teach us that first aid, and I said, Jesus, this is awful funny. And then finally, as the years progressed, from me as the only patrolman to 1 to 4 to 10 to 14, then I finally smartened up in the early years and became a first aid instructor and taught my own people, and that's where we came from. The first skis I can remember were a lot like these. In fact, they was about like those. They had no steel edges, and they had a leather strap, and we used to get them for $3.50. There was a Christmas present every year. They would last all year, and sometimes longer than that. The jar rubbers that he speaks about was my first bindings, and we used to rob my mother with the jar rubbers, and we always carried a whole pocket full of them. And my first ski boots were either rubber boots, rubber high-cuts, or they were the leather laced-up boots. And he also mentioned the spring and the going in back of the heel, and I can remember that very vividly before ski boots came out with a groove in the heel. And I thought, I tried the binding that he speaks about. Of course, the first one was the bear trap, and then I can remember from the bear trap before they had the swivel heel, not the swivel heel, but the spring heel that Wynn mentioned about, was they had a leather strap that came back like a belt buckle and just went around. And, you know, on rubber boots, it was pretty uncomfortable in the back of your Achilles tendon and grabbing your ankle. Well, then they come out with a spring deal, and I thought that was really an improvement, like he said, and I said, well, Jesus, that sounds like a good, but that bit in pretty hard too. So then we went to ski boots, and they were, you know, just leather boots from Bass, of course, because Bunny always finished the patrol with Bass ski boots. And I can remember the first day I ever tried it, and I tried them, and I had trouble holding that damn spring thing up on the heel of the boot. And I got to thinking about it, and I said, there's got to be some way that we can keep this heel on. So I got to talking to somebody, and somebody mentioned the fact to me, why don't you take them up to the local mill and put a groove in the back of the heel? And that sounded real good, so I took it up to the local guy in the mill and took it on an emery wheel and grooved the rubber. It was a rubber heel out. Went skiing the next weekend, and the first turn I pulled both heels right off because the heels were just nailed in. Our uphill capacity, whatever you wanted to say, was climbing, and with climbing skins, and they could be a kind of a pain in the neck at times. Sometimes, especially after steel edges came on skis, because once in a while one would slip a little bit. Excuse me, and the ski would slide back and it would cut off a strap or something, and you always had some little pieces of wire or some extra skins to patch with on the way up. Some people carried them in a pack on the way down. Most people would carry them wrapped around the waist, so you had these things. But it did get you up the hill, and they were, yeah, there's a pair that he has here. And what it is camel hair, mohair, and as you put your foot down, you had to kind of learn, you had to kind of lean ahead like you was walking uphill all the time to climb, but you could really climb quite a hill with it. And we also carried a block of caulk with us in the pack that we done our waxing with, and the wax was, again, Mother's Canyon plain white paraffin before they come to the Swix black gunk, I used to call it. It was real black, and it really smelled pretty bad. I can remember the first tough ski that I ever saw, as far as after it came out with steel edges. This was before Head came out. They had what they called an ebonite bottom. It was really, really tough. But before that came out, this was back when we were skiing at Bigelow, and we had the front throw bindings and the cables with the bear trap. And somebody come up with the idea of they had this Lund ski lacquer, and it was bright orange, and it really was a protective coat on the bottom of your skis. And we went to the local drugstore and bought some 3-inch roller and roller gauze bandage, Johnson & Johnson. We took this orange lacquer and we laid it out on the bottom of the ski, and then we rolled that roller gauze on there and then let it dry for just a little bit, and then we put on about 3 or 4 coats of that orange lacquer, and then we took a razor blade, if you had steel edges, and cut it off the edges. And this really worked well if you hit a rock, and very seldom you would in those days, because the snow again was deep and it was also soft because it wasn't manufactured like it is on today's skiing. But you'd gouge it out and you just put a piece of that back in, and away you'd go, and your skis would last 2 or 3 years. Some parts of the ski clothing were the hats. The first, I think everybody's instinct was to be warm, and they didn't layer like they do nowadays with the Gore-Tex and the polypropylene, and they all pretty much went to wool, but wool collected all the snow. As you fell, you had wool pants on, and you know what that was like. You looked like a domino snowman. So then they went to gabardine. In the early days it was all dark navy blue colored, floppy gabardine pants. And you had either a wool hat with air flaps or a gabardine hat. You always had the flaps, and you had the little chin strap, as you remember, that slid up with a little wooden ball. And of course you had chopper mittens on, and you always had, again, grandmother's home mittens on the inside for liners. It was the warmest thing, still is today, the warmest thing you have on your hand. So we kind of always looked for Christmas presents to be in that line, but everything was either black or real dark navy blue. And as far as the patrol was concerned, the ski poles that he mentioned, and it was very, very true that the first time that I ever skied, I went straight down the hill, and I had these big plain bamboo poles, and they was about as tall as I was. And you get to going, and you wondered, how in the hell do you stop, you know? So my first instinct was not to try to turn or to sit down, it was to jab that ski pole out there like that, and it caught me right there, and it shattered that bamboo pole, and it's a wonder it didn't shatter my jaw, but it didn't. And eventually a patrolman that was skiing a rope tow, you would see him carrying a rope tow grip. I think there was one shown here earlier that West had. As far as identification of it in another area, until the kids caught on, as far as the patroller was concerned, because they had a cross on the back and an armband on their arm, but they also always had a red flag on the ski pole. And this is how you told an early ski patrol. And then eventually, after the plain bamboo poles came about, they had enamel. They used to spray them with enamel, and you'd be skiing along the cold weather, and that pole would flex a little bit, and a piece of that enamel would come off about this long, and pretty quick you was back to plain bamboo. The big baskets on the bottom, you know, as far as walking, climbing, were a big help because they were supported in the snow. And I think where we was brought about with some of the bad habits is probably you'll hear Wes talking about it later in ski instruction. Those big baskets, you used to come to a bad corner, you got going fast, you'd kind of drag that basket, you know, and it'd kind of slow you down a little bit for that corner. And then I thought, they come out with an adjustable stainless steel pole, and I thought it was the world's greatest thing, and I thought it was the answer to all poles forever. And you could adjust it for a little small kid, or you could adjust it for an adult. But the only problem was it was real heavy. I don't know if any of you remember those or not. Of course, we all wore long johns, the old-fashioned long johns. Usually a shirt that was Woolwich inside, and a shirt and sweater, and a shell of nylon, which is also black, and of course first aid belt on the back. rope tows, I used to, before the corporation was formed in 1955, the first rope tow at Sugarloaf was in 1953. Like Wynn said, it was a Swedish portable rope tow, a real small rope, but it was on a little small toboggan. And I used to go up on weekends and run on white gas, and that was my job, to run that rope tow and to patrol that little slope there, which was around 600 feet. And then to pack it, the first packer I saw at Sugarloaf was an OC3 Oliver tractor. And what we done is took the pad bolts off in it, lots of oak planking. And you talk about abdominal snowman, that's about what you look like after you was on that. You remember the old Army packers with the fur around them? We used to put that on over that. It was open, you know. You just had steering clutches, and that was the packing part. You never dragged anything, never hauled anything or anything. And that would fly out. The toboggans, when I first went to the ski patrol business, were regular sliding toboggans. They were regular wooden toboggan that you would use, and we used to straddle them. We used 2 men. We used to, I think the idea of maybe possibly the idea of a chain or something like that came from tying the rope. We used to tie a rope in the curled up part of the toboggan, and then we used to get some wild friggin' rides going up those little T-bars sitting in the toboggans. And it was a constant nightmare of trying to keep the lift lines. Every time that it snowed great, you had more people, and then the more people you had, the worse the lift line get. It'd be up and down until we finally come to the conclusion that, you put a machine down and it takes about 10 minutes to work compared to all day as far as shoveling. But we spent hours and hours and hours and hours just shoveling, and then you was almost too tired in the afternoon to handle any accidents. But from the first toboggan, as I said, was wood, and then they had some Army surplus toboggans that were fiberglass, and they was kind of turned up at both ends. And I got a funny story. It wasn't funny at the time, but they was building the base lodge, and the base lodge, they had a lot of end pieces of wood left over, and I got them because at that time we had a wood stove in the top of the number 2 T-bar that Wynn put in, and had this toboggan just chock full of these pieces of wood, and I had it all tied on them. My ski poles, the red flag on top of them, and I was taking this up the T-bar. We wasn't open to the public, but it was a good idea we wasn't. And that thing was weighing it was hard taking it along, so what I'd done is took the rope and took a couple of wraps around the end of the T-bar, and I was going to wait till I get up to the top and then unwrap it and then unload. Well, the toboggan was back of me a little ways, and I went up over the unloading ramp. This was on number 2 T-bar, 2 of them. And I got to the ramp, and I started to go down to get off, and then when I started to get off, the bar was taking me up like this, and I couldn't, I had a hard job getting off. So then I put my hand over like this and shoved that rope off, and I could see I couldn't even see the toboggan then. I had to come up over the ramp, and I could see this rope going through the snow like this, like that. I made a dive for it, and that was unsuccessful, and I watched that thing go, and it went clear to Peavy before it struck a tower. Brand new toboggan, and it looked like a dynamite or a mud blast with all those pieces of wood, and my ski pole flew in the air about 30 feet, and that was my experience with the toboggan that way. Then eventually, as I said before, with the rope being underneath, I think sometimes there was a little drag effort, and we come to the conclusion that maybe it would help if we put chains on it. So eventually we put chains that were loose and under it, and then from that we built our own toboggan handles out of iron. And these sleds were heavy. The patrolmen today complain about, pulling the sled, but we used to pull them all the time. And then we went to, from that, of course nowadays they have the best known sled is a Cascade sled, fiberglass, and it has locking handles, and you can run the handles loose or empty and loaded and whatnot, but it makes it a lot easier. I still think that eventually, I've thought about it a lot, and I think sometime or another there can be, with bicycle clamps, like on a bicycle with the grips, come off the handles with a couple of cant dog hooks on the back of your fins, and you could relate on the back for a brake. We've done a lot of experimenting, and the first two-man sled that I saw, I went over to Cannon Mountain. It was again in the early 50s. Still got two of them. We don't use them, but they were made. First of all, they came and the handles are locked together, and they had a brake on the back, and you used it, and it had a junker iron. It looked like a cutting barrel. It was up and down, and you'd pull on the rope, which was on a door spring, and you could really go down a steep slope. And we used to use them on sluice and narrow gauge all the time. But they were heavy. They were made out of 2x4 railings, and they were very, very heavy. But we went from that, and then I can remember going, we thought we couldn't handle the one-man sleds on sluice and on gauge, and we went from with the two-man and used them there, and then at the top of double runner, at the top of that T-bar, we used to change over. Well, the changing over from one sled to another was poor practices, and then finally kind of going against good first aid practices, I should say. So then what we done, Stokes litters came out. So we put Stokes litters on all the sleds, and you could take the two-man sled down and take the Stokes off in it, put it on the one-man, and then you could go down to the bottom that way. And that's the way we done those. And then I thought, well, maybe it'd be easier to set on a seat on this damn thing. And we tried that, and that didn't. I had a lever on the side, and it would activate the brake. And the only thing was, going down a steep terrain, it was hard for you to stay buckled in. I'd even thought about a buckle, like a leather buckle or a seat belt. And then eventually we gave that idea up, and somebody else invented a better sled. Injuries in those days, I think, were a few, and I listed several reasons. We had injuries. We had fibula breaks and tibia breaks, and once in a while you get a femur break, which is the big bone up above. But remembering that the boots were soft and very flexible, and the snow being soft, and the trails being narrower, and I think it made the skiers, which there again were small in number compared to nowadays, made them more safety aware of getting into problems because they had limited amount of space to turn in. And that's about all I have.
You want to talk out here, or do you want to go in so you can do your video at the same time? Out here?
I have a little short video that I think you people would enjoy seeing.
We can move inside if you like.
They asked me to talk about ski instruction. Well, you know, I really feel that most of us have learned to ski the hard way. We did a lot of things wrong, and we gradually learned to get down the hill. And actually, ski instruction ends up by going to the top of the hill and getting to the bottom. If you make a turn to the right and one to the left and get to the bottom, you're a skier. It doesn't matter whether you stem bogan or you up stem or whatever you do, or whether you don't stem at all. You're still a skier if you get to the bottom. So I think it's rather trite to try to get technical about ski instruction and whether you should do this or do that. I will say that the progression of ski instructing over the last 50 years, which I've been involved in, is that originally back in the 30s, there was a great deal of emphasis on upper body torque motion or turning motion with your arms and shoulders. Today, it's all lower body motion. You steer with your feet. You do it all with your legs, and your upper body is looking right down the hill all the time. And that's the whole progression of the development of ski technique. It's getting better and better. What's he got here? There I am. I really think that each year we see new things happen in ski instruction, and somebody comes up with another gimmick. But and we're getting so we stand on both feet. You watch the young boys skiing on Burton boards now, and you say, maybe that's what people will be doing. They'll be standing on both feet all the time. And because those guys have to stand on both feet. We used to say, well, you pick up your inside ski and do a schrittbogen, and so what you do, though, time you get to the bottom of the hill, and I think you'll enjoy this little short clip we get here, that you do everything. And there is a contrast between, like, I have some of myself in there and some of Tommy Reynolds, and I like the way Tommy Reynolds skis, by the way. I think you'll notice that my upper body tends to rotate much more than Tommy's, which is a holdover from the way I learned to ski back in the 30s. And I started skiing, by the way, in the winter of 36, 37. And I came under the influence of Beno Rybicka, who was of the Hannah Schneider ski school. And he was an ab stemmer. He always made a little downhill ski stem before he started to turn. But I think it's immaterial, really, whether you make, like, Otto Sneebs started teaching European style turning over in New York State back in the mid-30s, and the Beno Rybicka and the Hannah Schneider, he came to this country in 39. They taught the ab stem, or downhill ski stem, whereas Sneebs taught the upper ski stemming. I started skiing at Bridgeton, and so I came under that North Conway influence. Some of the early ski instructors from that area, like Francis Savard and Arthur Callan, Wynn remembers all those people, and they went to Austria and learned how to ski the Hannah Schneider technique. I think probably the first really good racing skier, which Tommy would be interested in, who came from Europe to teach skiing, was Tony Matt. He came over here in 38, and I had the opportunity of going to his racing school a couple of years. And he was a really strong skier, and I have 2 or 3 pictures taken of him in 38, and I showed them to Tommy, and he's still right there, just the way we are today. I think it would be, rather than talk any more about that, I think it would be interesting to get you people on your feet, because you must be a little bit cool now.
I got a question, though, before you do it. I'd like to know, what do you think some of the differences are for the kids who start skiing today, when they're starting younger and they have, say, better equipment than the kids who started maybe a little bit later and had to really deal with, jaw rubber bindings and things like that? And what do you think about that?
Well,
skiing has changed.
Actually, I taught skiing at Farmington from 47 to 71, and in that era, we were in binding era. We started out with bat traps, so-called, and we started out usually with a cable binding, although I started out with a Bilstein heel spring, which was like a touring binding would be today. The 2 straps and the spring around your heel, and it was on the side of your iron in the front, the iron toe piece. And then they put it down on the side of the ski to give you a little downhill pressure. And then they went into a super diagonal, which was a rubber thing, but they had a hamstake heel spring, which was fitted around your ankle here and went down to a hook on the back of your ski. Now those are all antique things, and they're nice to remember, but they don't really have much relativity to teaching of skiing. I do think that probably the one factor that the kids today have over is snow condition is so much better today due to our packing and snow making. Man-made snow is much better to race on than natural snow, because it has a finer structure and more durable, really. You can race 100 races on man-made snow, whereas if you race 25 after the first 20 on natural snow, I forget it. you had a rut 3 feet deep. I don't think that the kids today have any better opportunity than the kids did 35 years ago. The only thing they have probably is the better programs. still got to want to do it. Would you like to see this, Dave?
Yep, take a break.
You all need to...
You may have to bring your chairs if you want
Bring your
to
chairs.
for a while.
The only thing I...
I'm Chris Easton. Myself will kind of be the judge as to what the job is. I think we can make it here somehow. I guess I'm supposed to speak on interscholastic and intercollegiate skiing or ski racing in general. And in a sense, I really shouldn't be the person that is doing this, because there are some other people currently still operating in the state of Maine who are far ahead of me as far as background and achievements and the length of time that they've been involved. And so I'll take a minute and mention those people. And we'll start with the oldest one first. I guess the oldest one is probably Ted Curtis, and Ted Curtis couldn't make it here today. Dana did speak with him. Ted was the ski coach at the University of Maine for I don't know how many years. And 31 years, and just had a tremendous amount of success. I guess there were, what, 34 state championships, Dana, or something?
24 championships
24.
in 31 years.
And the other person is Zeke Dwelly, who is Ted's counterpart as far as schoolboy skiing is concerned. And Zeke Dwelly was at Edward Little for years before I ever got into ski coaching, and in fact was getting out just as I was coming into ski coaching. And Zeke wasn't able to be here either. The third person who covers both prep school skiing and collegiate skiing in the state of Maine, and wasn't able to be here, is Cy Dunkley. And of course, Cy has a great background. He was the ski coach at Kent's Hill for years, and then coached skiing at the University of Maine, later coached skiing at Colby, and then went out of state and coached skiing at Amherst, and also coached skiing, not currently, he just retired, was ski coach at New England College. So anyway, I'm the guy that kind of got the call, and the fellow that is closest, so here I am. In a sense, I guess you might say I'm an imposter, because I got into all this by mistake. I wanted to be a lawyer, and I quit skiing once, and that was right after I got out of high school. And there's an awful way to get back into skiing, but I got drunk and kind of got back into it that way. I told Warren Cook the story once. I don't even know if Stubb knows this, but a friend of mine came home from the Army, and we used to ski race together in high school, and I hadn't skied in years. In fact, I gave it up for 4 or 5 years while I was at the University of Maine, and Ted Curtis tried to get me to ski all the time, but I knew if I went skiing, I really couldn't stop, and I had to graduate from college on time. I couldn't fail, and I couldn't flunk out and do some of the things the other kids were doing, because we didn't have any money. So I just gave it up and tried to play baseball, and pretty much stayed with the scholastic program. And this friend of mine hadn't skied in quite a while either. So he came home, and we got talking, and we were up in the kitchen, and I guess we put away most of a case of beer, and it was long in December sometime. It was the first year that Sugarloaf had opened, and we decided that we should go to Sugarloaf, and so we went over. And we didn't bother to buy any tickets or anything. Hell, the lift was running. And we'd skied with Amos for years anyway. Stubby and Amos and some of the Kingfield kids used to come over to Bingham and ski at Baker Mountain on Sundays when they weren't climbing or when they were sick of skiing somewhere else. So we no need to walk any further than you had to, so we drove right up and beyond the parking lots and everything else, and stuck the car right in front of the lodge. we just kind of admired it. Then we got out and put on our skis and went out and got on the lift and skied around. And Roger Peabody, they were getting ready for a race, and we ran all of Roger Peabody's courses, which kind of disgusted him. And finally, the ski patrol did catch up with us, and they got us into Amos's office. And Amos scolded us, and we felt pretty bad. And the other fellow got crying. And I told him stop his crying, it'll be all right. I said, I'd take care of it. Amos said, how are you going to take care of it? He said, how can you help me? He said, you haven't paid, you haven't done this, you haven't done that. He said, I'm ashamed of you. I said, well, I know what you mean, Amos. He said, I tell you how you can help me. If you'll come over here and teach skiing for me, every weekend the rest of the year, he said, it'll help me a lot. And that's the only way, he said, I'll let you off. And they had a fellow by the name of Uli Chazot there then, who was a French teacher and a good one, but he couldn't really speak a great deal of English. And we made all of the change out of a cigar box, and the rest that was just filled with money. You know, nobody ever kept track. Just fill it up. And so I said I'd be there, and I was there for 20 years, part-time. So that's kind of the way I got back into skiing, and I got into ski coaching through Sugarloaf, in the fact that I'd had somewhat of a competitive background, in that when we were kids in Bingham, and there was interscholastic skiing at that time, much like Stubbs' situation in Kingfield, we didn't have anything else to do. It was a very small town, and Baker Mountain was right up the road. And a very nice family came to town, which carried Bingham for some time, and that was the Quimbys. And they started the veneer mill. Of course, everybody worked in the veneer mill, and they had quite a bit of money, so they built a tennis court along with a doctor and another family, and everybody could play on the town court, and you could watch them, and you could learn to play pretty good tennis, because they were great tennis courts. And it was the same way with skiing. Nobody really knew how to ski. But if you watch Langdon Quimby, you can learn how to ski, because he was an excellent skier. And so we all went skiing on the hill across the street from my house, and everybody skied there weekends. And they kind of learned to ski through just watching Langdon ski. And then Langdon opened the ski tow at Baker Mountain. He put in a lift of their rope tow. They used to drive a veneer truck back and forth, or have the mill people do that. They'd take all us kids and anybody that wanted to go up. So we skied every weekend up to Baker Mountain, and we skied every day after school across the street on the hill by my house. And so I just kind of got into this, and by the time I was 17, I guess I'd had enough of it and graduated from high school and really kind of forgot about it and went to college and went on to other things. But as I got back into it at Sugarloaf, it seemed to be one need after another, and I guess I happened to be the guy most closely associated with the situation and perhaps could fulfill the need. So about that time, Stubb was pretty much getting into the ski patrol thing and starting to get that nailed down at Sugarloaf, and Werner Rothbacher came to direct the ski school. And the foreigners were excellent ski teachers, but for the most part, or at least at that time in that situation, the organizational element, the structure, wasn't the strongest fort. And they wanted a junior program of some sort, and they had a guy by the name of Andy Shenchana, who was later followed by Peter Skovsky, who were excellent coaches, but as far as getting something down and getting kids involved, what have you, they didn't really have the follow through for that type of thing. And I guess this is where I came in, and I pretty much helped those guys structure the program. And Jean Luce came into the picture, and of course everybody knows what she has done with ski clubs and academies and so on and so forth. And this is pretty much the way the first real solid junior program in the state of Maine was formed. Now the high schools were something else. The high schools just had a tremendous background, and this goes way back to Zeke Dwelling and Edward Little and all of the things that he had done with Freiburg Academy, with Gould Academy, and I can't go back that far to remember some of those schools, but I remember there's a guy, there was a former Olympian, Warren Shivers was at Gould. Zeke Dwelly was at Edward Little. I can't remember who was at Freiburg, but there was a number of prep schools that were very strong. Hebron, I guess, was strong at that time. And then high schools, it didn't make any difference whether you were Edward Little or whether it was Bingham High School. If there were a high school race, it seemed so you could get to it. And now I'm going back again, but a lot of those high school races we were at. I don't know how we got invited, or I didn't know anything about the structure, but we'd go to a high school race and we might race against School Academy one week, and then we might race against Monson and Skowhegan and somebody else the next week. It was just, and I can't even remember giant slalom. I can remember having to run what they called downhills, where you would ride a rope tow or something as far as the top of the rope tow, and then you walk up into a mountain trail maybe another 100 to 200 to 300 yards, and it was probably as wide as what you're sitting on there, that little patio type thing. And it had a couple of hooks in it, and then you came out onto a hill and it was just all straight. And then they did have slalom, but as far as training and training concepts and understanding of training, it was pretty haphazard. But that grew, of course, as high school programs became more refined and prep schools started to hire some different people. There was Paul Cayley at Gould Academy, there was a Mac Miller at Rumford, there was a Dick Gould at Farmington High School, and then there was Cy Dunkley at Kent's Hill, and they really had a nucleus of outstanding ski teams. Like I can remember the national champion was Dickie Ireland from Gould Academy, and this is the first time that I had ever known there was such a thing as a divisional national championship. And Dickie Ireland won that, and he also was a schoolboy champion and prep school champion for Gould Academy. And then they had, I think it was the Cloughs at Kent's Hill. Of course, John Clough went on to coach on the national team, went on to race on the national team, and went on to race on the pro circuit. And Edward Little just put almost a good part of our Nordic team through a high school program under Zeke Dwelly. There was Johnny Bauer, Tommy Upham, all of the Kendall kids, and many others who came out of Edward Little High School. So this was becoming far more refined at that time, and coaching was becoming more refined. But there wasn't any place where you could learn to coach, or where you could really get your teeth into it. Like you could go to Maine, or you could go to Springfield, and you could major in physical education, and you could actually learn how to be a football coach. You could learn how to be a basketball coach. But there wasn't any structure like that for ski coaches. But it was getting better, and there were some excellent people. Going now back and skipping over the junior section from Sugarloaf here, and going into the collegiate section, this is when people started to come into the college ranks, and I guess Wynn mentioned Otto Schneebs. There were people at that time that were perhaps, let's see, what do I want to say, were not more progressive, but the Otto Schneebs area had pretty much gone out, and you were getting people like Al Merrill at Dartmouth, Bobo Sheehan at Middlebury, Ed Blood at UNH. And those were just outstanding ski coaches nationally. And then you had Willie Scheffler coming into DU, and shortly after that you had, after Beedy got out of Middlebury, then you had Beedy coming into the University of Colorado. So ski coaching on a collegiate level was becoming more refined. It wasn't so much, they still had the carnivals, but it wasn't so much of a carnival atmosphere. In fact, they were beginning to get, from the recruiting element, many foreign athletes, and many of these schools were full scholarshiping these kids. Now you leave the college situation again, you come back to the junior situation, or meanwhile back at the ranch, and I'm speaking about this from Maine basically. Your first real junior programs came from Sugarloaf and Farmington. And long before Sugarloaf started the junior program syndrome with Gene Luce and the growth out of the Sugarloaf Ski School, Wes Marco was building the Farmington program. And I think at one time, if I don't miss this, and Wes, you correct me if I'm wrong, from that area or from Wes's program or outgrowths of Wes's program, I think he had 7 kids on the junior national team at one time. And this is your Tommy Stearns and Norm Twitchells and Webbers and so on and so forth, and I couldn't name them all, perhaps Wes could. And these are both boys and girls, and they were getting national recognition. But Wes couldn't handle that forever. Those kids grew up, and Wes kind of migrated from there into other things. The program kind of dropped. As that program dropped off, the Sugarloaf program became more prevalent. And with the Sugarloaf program, I think we saw rapid growth from the time that I helped Gene Luce get the program started to the time that we got Ned McSherry and Jeff Lathrop. And with Ned McSherry and Jeff Lathrop, the program just started to broaden out. Now, many of these kids were skiing both ways. They were skiing for an Edward Little High School like Carl Anderson and skiing on a divisional circuit in the weekends. And some of these kids went on and made national teams like Gail Blackburn, Carl Anderson, Timmy Scalings, etc. And they were going both ways. Many of these kids skied for high school during the week and skied for a junior program on the weekends. I think the thing that has been most impressive for me through the years is to see the coaching improve and to see the organization and the structure improve as far as junior racing is concerned. And unfortunately, to see that same structure that was in high school racing pretty much depreciate. And I think only within the last 2 or 3 years have we seen high school racing kind of catch on again and get its feet placed. And I hope over the next period of 5 or so years, we'll see high school racing join and become strong again, and perhaps become even part of weekend junior programs once more, or at least have more communication with them. I think we find now in some of the junior programs or some of the academies that we have a weekend element. Like, if I'm not mistaken, I think now in Carabasset Valley Academy there's a weekend group that's really beginning to be fairly sound. I think you're finding the same thing at Sunday River. There seems to be more input now from schoolboy skiing and about schoolboy skiing within the structure of schoolboy skiing than there's ever been, at least over the last 10 years. Collegiate skiing is at a crossroads. And it's at a crossroads because of the National Collegiate Ski Association and the NCAA. The NCAA wants to make bucks, and they really want to be involved in team sports. And they don't want to be involved kind of with outgrowth sports who aren't sending a full complement of athletes and can't afford to send a full complement of athletes. So there's currently some turmoil between the NCAA and the top collegiate skiing structure in Division I. The National Collegiate Ski Association is a group of just outgrowth colleges that you couldn't name them all. That is under the direction of a fellow by the name of Helger Peterson, who is apparently an exceptional hustler and has hustled a lot of dollars and has really made a good organization of it. They're trying to join with the Division I skiing under the NCAA and merge under National Collegiate Skiing. I don't know, but maybe that perhaps in the long run is the way to go. But there's an awful lot of problems that they do have to work out first. And in the process, NCAA skiing, except for your top schools like CU, Utah, Vermont in the East, and those are probably the only 3, has been weakened and weakened tremendously. Collegiate skiing in Maine really is non-existent. The only existing program that we have now is at Bates College, and they're racing on a Division I level. And I would think it would be very hard for them to do this in relation to the travel, the practice situations, etc. So we have a big void right now in collegiate skiing. We're far worse off than high school skiing. There are some ideas that one could pursue, and I'll end with this. There are some ideas that one could pursue if you wanted to enhance collegiate skiing in Maine. And Warren Cook and myself and Dr. Roche talked about this a little bit last winter, and that would be to get all of the presidents in all of the skiing colleges in Maine interested, and more than aware, they have to be interested in the fact that collegiate skiing could probably better the state of Maine at this point in time. I think Maine as a ski industry factor, the mountains, the shops, the public relation element that goes into it, actually needs collegiate skiing. In order to do this, you have to have presidents that say, hey, look, we're going to get together and we're going to have collegiate skiing here, just like we have Division I hockey at the University of Maine, or just like we turn the basketball program around at the University of Maine. And we're going to talk to our ADs, and somehow each one of us is going to raise a component of money, and we're going to sponsor collegiate skiing, so that you'd have 6 Maine colleges that raced every week, and they'd rotate areas, and it would be up to the areas to be the hosts. And then they would have their own training elements, and every one of these colleges has a hill quite close to the campus, so the training would not be a problem. The problem would really be financing the program, making sure that you had bands to travel with, making sure that your mountains would really get sponsorship, or at least would give you lifts and accessibility, and making sure that the race was actually run so that the schools didn't have to per se run the race. And then backing the program from the college as far as uniforms, as far as a coaching position, as far as actually treating it like a team sport. And if you could do this, and this would take some money, it sounds simple as I can't even talk about it, but if you could do this, if you could get the financial backing, then you would have a 6-team league here in the state of Maine that would give you individual champions in every competition. In other words, an individual champion in alpine, an individual champion in cross country, jumping, etc. These individual champions would be able to go on to Middlebury to the Division I championship, Eastern Intercollegiate Championship, that qualifies for the NCAA. Also, you would take your team champion of all your 6 colleges, and that would be the qualifier for the team champion. So you'd send individual champions, you'd send your team champion to Middlebury. There, those people would compete for a qualifying place at the NCAAs, wherever the NCAAs were to be held that year. You would also help your junior skiing in Maine, because then you would have a better FIS point base, and you would have a not only more breadth, but you would have more points and more top points because of your college competitors. And they would race in the state each Sunday, and this would give you a good point base. Now, it would also help your high schools, because then you could go down and say, hey, look, if you have a good high school program here, you can come to Farmington, or you can go to USM, or you can go to Maine. There's a place for you here. We have a good scholastic situation. We have a breadth of scholastic things we can offer you. You can come here and you can compete in the state and college. You also can compete in the state and divisional racing. And this, if the national office would look at this from the ski coach's point, from the ski team's point of view, and I'm talking about the U.S. ski team, and you could do this in Maine, if you could do this in Vermont, you could do this in New Hampshire, if you could do it in several western states, that's the best development program that you could possibly have. Because then you're coming up right through, just like hockey, just like football or anything else. But it's something that it would have to come from the top, it would have to come from the presidents in order for this to be realistic. I guess I've been completely unprepared. That's evident, I'm sure. I rambled on kind of through schoolboy skiing, through junior skiing, and into collegiate skiing, and I guess this is pretty much the topic they wanted me to cover, and I've covered it to the best of my ability, and it's 12 o'clock and everybody's hungry, and if you want me to answer any questions, I'd be glad to do so, either one-on-one or right here in front of you, if I could answer the questions that you ask.
Thank you.
You're getting wet. I'm getting wet. Yep.